My parents demanded that I pay for my sister's $120,000 wedding from my college fund. When I refused, they humiliated me during the ceremony by seating me at the kids' table. "You don't deserve to sit with adults," my dad whispered. After 1 hour when they stood on the stage and announced I was too selfish to contribute to family. I'm Delaney, 25 now, but when this all began, I was 19 and still holding on to the belief that family stood for something sacred. That blood ties could bend, but not break. That your parents, no matter how flawed, wouldn't throw you under the bus for the sake of appearances. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. The signs weren't subtle, but when you're raised in dysfunction, it takes years to realize how warped your normal really is. I grew up in Bellingham, Washington, in a modest split-level house with my older sister Clarice, my mom Miriam, and my dad Roy. Our house was filled with the typical chaos of a suburban family: loud dinners, early morning school rushes, late-night arguments over curfews. But underneath that everyday noise was something more sinister: favoritism so obvious it could have had its own seat at the dinner table. Clarice was the chosen one. The kind of girl who always had a ribbon in her hair and a lineup of people ready to do her bidding. Everything she did, every mediocre talent show, every B- science fair project, was treated like a Nobel-level accomplishment. Meanwhile, I could get a 4.0 GPA and barely get a nod. I was the quiet one, the kid who didn't bring as much joy into a room, according to my mom during one particularly cruel parent-teacher night. But it didn't matter as much back then. I had one person in my corner, my grandfather. He was old school and gruff, but he saw me. Really saw me. He was the one who took me on long walks along Boulevard Park and bought me my first oceanography book. The only person who ever told me that it was okay to want something just for myself. When he passed away, I was 17. The grief hit hard, but what came after was even more surprising: he left me a college fund. $150,000 in a locked account under my name, for education only. He'd set it up with a lawyer years prior, apparently without telling my parents. The lawyer gave me all the documents, all the control. It was like a light in a very dark room. Clarice and my parents were furious. They acted supportive at first, but that veneer cracked quickly. My mom said it was unfair. My dad called it divisive. Clarice, who was then halfway through a communications degree paid entirely by our parents, cried about how I was being gifted success. I tried to stay out of it. I focused on school, got accepted to the University of Washington, and began planning a future I'd worked hard for. For a while, things were calm. Tense, yes, but bearable. I visited home occasionally, though I always left with a pit in my stomach. I started to accept that we weren't the close-knit family people assumed we were. Then, when I was 21, everything imploded. It was a Sunday afternoon in August. I'd driven home from Seattle to catch up, as my mom put it. She made my favorite, lemon rosemary chicken, but the energy at the table was off. Clarice and her fiancé, Landon, were there, all smiles and inside jokes. My parents looked oddly giddy. After dinner, they asked me to sit down in the living room. That's when my dad pulled out a spreadsheet. Literally. He said they'd been working out the wedding budget and were a little short. The venue Clarice wanted, the catering, the dress, the destination honeymoon, it was all very elevated, he said. A once-in-a-lifetime event. I was confused. Okay. Then he said it. We were thinking you could contribute. From the fund. Just $120,000. My laugh was involuntary. I thought it was some elaborate prank. But their faces were dead serious. Clarice looked annoyed, like I was already wasting time by not saying yes. I blinked. You want me to pay for your wedding with my college money? Mom stepped in. It's not just her wedding. It's a celebration of family. Of legacy. Dad added, you'll still have enough for school. Just take out loans like everyone else. We took care of you long enough. My ears were ringing. That money is for my education. Grandpa made that very clear. Clarice rolled her eyes. Wow. Okay. Guess we know where you stand. I left without another word. The fallout was ugly. For weeks, I was plagued with calls, emails, even letters. Family members I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly telling me how disappointed they were in me. How I was tearing the family apart over a few dollars. I stopped answering. I went back to school, tried to refocus. My professor, Dr. Kleiber, noticed I was struggling and helped me get back on track. I started diving into my thesis, got a part-time job at a research lab, and began planning for grad school. I didn't think I'd hear from them again. But then, 6 months later, I got an email. An invitation to the wedding. Clarice and Landon were tying the knot at a resort in Leavenworth. No note, no personal message, just a formal PDF attachment. My name was misspelled. I wasn't going to go. But something in me, maybe spite, maybe hope for some form of closure, told me I needed to see it through. So I went. The resort was absurd. Crystals on every table. Champagne waterfalls. A live harpist playing during the cocktail hour. The moment I checked in at the reception desk, the wedding planner handed me a name tag. It had dolphins on it. And the number 19. Kids table, she said brightly. I froze. Excuse me? You're at table 19. With the junior guests. And she walked away. Sure enough, tucked in a corner of the reception hall was a tiny table with bright plastic cups, crayons, and a few kids under 10 years old. My place card was there, misspelled again. I just stood there. That's when my dad approached. He leaned down, close enough for only me to hear, and said, "You don't deserve to sit with adults." Then he walked off. I should have left right then. But I didn't. I sat at the kids' table for almost an hour. I watched Clarice swan around in a $20,000 dress I didn't pay for. I watched my mother gush over her perfect girl. Then came the speeches. My parents took the mic, all smiles and misty eyes. My dad gave some generic compliments to Clarice and Landon, and then pivoted, directly. Family means sacrifice. Some of us here know that better than others. Some chose to be part of this moment. Some chose to think only of themselves. That's fine. But we celebrate unity tonight, not selfishness. I sat there, humiliated, every nerve in my body lit with shame. Nobody looked at me. Not even Clarice. That was the moment I knew I was done. I left before the cake was cut. Got in my car and drove until I hit Wenatchee. Checked into a roadside motel, curled up on the bed, and just fell apart. But that night also marked a shift. I called the lawyer who'd managed the college fund and told him everything. He'd already suspected something. My parents had tried to access the account twice. He locked it down tight, flagged any attempts to move funds. I finished my degree. Got into grad school. Now, I work in Oregon as a marine conservationist. I live in a rented cottage near the coast with 2 cats, a bike, and a pretty decent life. I haven't spoken to my parents in over 3 years. They've tried. Oh, they've tried. Emails, letters, birthday cards. My mom even sent a long Facebook message under a fake name. I didn't reply. And Clarice? She divorced Landon after 2 years. Infidelity. She moved back home. I hear from a distant cousin that she's trying to get back on her feet. My parents blame me, obviously. Say that the shame of a broken family set the tone. At this point, I don't even feel anger. Just distance. The kind of silence that doesn't ache anymore. I started therapy during my last semester of undergrad. One of the hardest things my therapist, Denise, ever told me was this: you keep expecting them to act like parents when they've never really been parents to you. That sentence stayed with me. It settled deep in my chest like a heavy stone. For so long, I had been measuring my worth based on how they treated me. I thought if I was better, kinder, quieter, smarter, they would finally see me. Maybe they'd stop comparing me to Clarice. Maybe they'd look at me and feel pride. Maybe they'd even say they loved me without it being transactional. But Denise helped me realize that wasn't going to happen. And it never had anything to do with me. After I cut contact, there was a period of disorientation. Holidays were the worst. Thanksgiving especially. I didn't have a partner, I didn't have close friends who were free, and I didn't have extended family that didn't see me as the villain. The first year, I spent it alone in my little apartment in West Seattle, eating a microwaved turkey dinner while watching old documentaries on humpback whales. I cried, of course. But there was also a strange calm in it. No fake smiles. No eggshell walking. No passive-aggressive digs about how Clarice would never live like this. Just me, my own quiet company, and the freedom to feel whatever I needed to feel. Over time, the grief morphed into acceptance. I stopped checking my parents' social media. I stopped wondering if they'd suddenly show up at my door. I even started sleeping better. Some mornings, I'd wake up and have to remind myself, you don't have to earn their love anymore. You don't have to try. Still, there were relapses. Like the day I got into grad school in Monterey. I had this rush of pride and immediately thought, call mom. And then I remembered she hadn't congratulated me once during undergrad. Not when I made the dean's list. Not when I got published in a student marine science journal. Not when I won the departmental award for research. That call never would have been about celebrating me, it would have been about redirecting the spotlight back to them. So I didn't call. Instead, I called my professor, Dr. Kleiber. He said, I hope you realize you earned every bit of this. I teared up right there on the campus sidewalk. When I moved to Monterey, something shifted even more. The air felt different. Cleaner. Brighter. I lived in a shared house with 2 other grad students, both of whom had complicated families too. We bonded over quiet coffee mornings and late-night deadlines. I finally found my people who didn't need me to shrink to fit into their idea of me. In that first year, I started making traditions. Ones that were mine. Every Sunday morning, I'd ride my bike down to the Cannery Row trails and watch the sea lions. On Wednesdays, I treated myself to lunch at this tiny Cuban cafe down the street. On the first Friday of each month, I wrote a letter to my future self. I filled them with little reminders, you are doing okay. You are allowed to be happy without permission. But then came the envelope. No return address. Just my name in handwriting I hadn't seen in over a year, my mother's. I shouldn't have opened it. But I did. Inside was a letter that started with a list of everything she thought I'd taken from the family. Her words. Taken. The college fund. Taken. The chance for Clarice to have a once-in-a-lifetime wedding. Taken. The ability to celebrate as a real family. Taken. And then came the kicker, you chose to betray us, and we still hope you grow out of this phase. A phase. She thought protecting my future, refusing to be used, cutting ties with toxic people, was a phase. I shredded the letter. But I kept the envelope. I pinned it to my wall, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder. A line in the sand. This is who they are. This is how far they'll go to make me feel small. Never again. Around this time, Clarice reached out. Not directly. She sent a message through a mutual acquaintance, one of her former college friends I'd met once during a spring break years ago. The message was simple, Clarice wants to talk. She's not the same person anymore. I didn't respond. At least, not right away. I sat on that message for weeks. Thought about what she'd done. Thought about the way she never spoke up when our parents tore me down. About the smirk she wore at that wedding. About how she never once said thank you when I said no, only that I was ruining everything. But then I started wondering, what if she had changed? Curiosity got the better of me. I agreed to a phone call. One call. One time. We scheduled it on a Saturday afternoon. I was on the back porch of my house in Oregon, the sound of gulls in the background. My hands were shaking when I picked up. Her voice was softer than I remembered. Tired, almost. She opened with an apology. Not a perfect one. Not a magical string of words that made everything okay. But real enough that I felt something shift. She said she knew she was awful to me. That she let herself believe what our parents told her, that I was cold, selfish, too proud. That when her marriage fell apart, she started seeing things more clearly. You were the only one they couldn't control, she said. I think that scared them. I listened. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just listened. When she was done, I told her I appreciated her reaching out. That I hoped she was healing. But I also told her that forgiveness wasn't a bridge, it was a gate. And only I had the key. We haven't spoken since. Not because I hate her. But because I'm still deciding whether I want that door to open. My parents, as far as I know, still live in the same house in Bellingham. My cousin sent me a photo recently, mom and dad at some neighborhood party, holding matching martinis, smiling like the world hadn't burned down behind them. That photo didn't hurt. Not the way I thought it might. If anything, it made me feel free. I think the hardest part to explain, especially to people who come from loving, functional families, is that grieving the idea of parents hurts more than grieving the people themselves. What I've mourned isn't Roy and Miriam, the flawed, deeply selfish individuals who raised me, but the parents I imagined they could have been. The ones I created in my head every time I excelled at something and wished someone would notice. The imaginary mom who would tell me she was proud. The father who would help me move into my dorm without comparing me to Clarice. That fictional version of them? I grieved her. I grieved him. For years. It didn't help that every so often, reminders would creep in through the cracks. A forwarded holiday invitation from an extended relative. A family group photo posted on Facebook that still included my childhood pictures on the mantle, even though I hadn't been home in over 3 years. And then there were the concerned messages. The ones from people who knew my parents' side of the story but not mine. Cousins, old neighbors, even a former teacher once. They talk about you a lot. They just miss you. I'm sure they didn't mean to hurt you. You'll regret not speaking to them someday. I didn't respond to most of them. I couldn't. Because what people don't understand is that sometimes, loving your family has to happen from afar, for your own survival. What gave me comfort wasn't trying to repair what was broken, but building something entirely new. My advisor in grad school, Dr. Yamada, had this phrase she used all the time: build your boat before the storm. I clung to that. I threw myself into my work, built up a community of researchers, joined local coastal cleanup groups, and even taught ocean education to school kids. The days were long but fulfilling. There was a young girl named Nora who came to one of my classes with her dad. She was maybe 10, bright-eyed, obsessed with tide pools. After class, she came up to me and said, "You make the ocean sound like it's your friend." I smiled and told her, "It is." That moment stuck with me. Because for the first time in years, I felt like I was passing something good forward. That maybe I didn't get the parents I wanted, but I could still be someone else's lighthouse. I adopted a rescue cat around then, Miso. She's temperamental and has zero interest in being cuddled, but she sits near me when I work and chirps when the kettle boils. Her presence is grounding in a way I didn't expect. One evening, maybe a year and a half into my new life, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I rarely answer unknown calls, but something told me to pick up. It was my father. I recognized his voice instantly. Gravelly, impatient, the way it always sounded when he was waiting for someone else to speak. "I'm not calling to argue," he said. That was a first. He told me they were selling the house. That Clarice had moved out and was living in Spokane now. That he and Mom were thinking of retiring to Arizona. He said he wanted to clear the air. I asked him, why now? His answer? Because life's short, and I don't want you thinking we didn't love you. I let out this dry, half laugh. I didn't mean to, but it escaped before I could stop it. He didn't yell. He didn't defend himself. He just said, "We did what we thought was right." I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I told him, "What you thought was right nearly destroyed me." There was silence on the other end. Eventually, he said, "I'm sorry you feel that way." That's the thing about my dad, he could never say "I'm sorry I did that." Only "sorry you feel that way." Subtle, but it makes all the difference. We hung up not long after. I didn't feel better. I didn't feel worse. I just felt confirmed. Like life had shown me the same lesson again. Some people will never understand the harm they caused, because that would require acknowledging they weren't the heroes of their own story. About a month later, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address again, but the handwriting was familiar. Inside was a photo of our old family home, now empty. The house was staged, ready for sale. The back of the photo had one sentence: "This chapter is closing. We hope you'll be part of the next." I tore it in half and threw it out. But again, I kept the envelope. Because while I no longer feel tied to them, I haven't quite figured out if I'm free either. That's the part people don't talk about, how healing isn't linear. Some days you feel strong, whole, even joyful. Other days, you hear an old voicemail or see a photo tucked in a drawer and suddenly you're 16 again, begging someone to see you. What's changed is that now, I don't stay in those moments. I feel them. I breathe through them. Then I go make tea, pet miso, and move on. I've started writing again. Not just letters to my future self, but short stories, essays. One of them, a personal piece on boundaries and family estrangement, was accepted into an online journal. I used a pseudonym, but I kept reading the comment section, wondering if someone from my past would recognize it. Nobody did. And that was strangely comforting too. A year after that phone call with my dad, I got another unexpected message. This time from Clarice. Not through someone else. Not vague or coded. A direct email. Subject line: "No expectations, just honesty." I stared at the email for 3 days before opening it. The subject line had been so calm, so unlike Clarice, that I didn't trust it. My finger hovered over delete more than once. But curiosity, always my Achilles heel, won. It was a long email. A lot longer than I expected. She began with an apology. Not a grand, sweeping declaration of redemption, but something more grounded. She admitted she had been a pawn in our parents' game for most of her life, and that it had taken losing her marriage, her job, and eventually having to move out of our parents' house for her to finally confront some uncomfortable truths. She wrote, "I was cruel to you because it was easier than confronting how empty my life actually felt. I believed Mom and Dad when they told me you were cold and selfish. It made it easier to ignore my own emptiness." Then she said something I never expected to read. "I found the journal. Grandpa's journal. The one he kept during the last year of his life. Apparently, it had been packed away in a box of old keepsakes stored in the basement. Clarice found it while helping our parents clear out the house for their move. He'd written pages about me, memories of our walks, my questions about sea life, his hopes for my future, how proud he was of me. Clarice attached a scan of one entry. I recognized his shaky handwriting immediately. "Delaney is the only one who listens. The only one who doesn't take. I leave the fund for her, not because I favor her, but because I trust her not to waste it. She's the future, not the family showpiece." I didn't cry, but I felt something loosen in me. A deep, silent validation. Clarice ended the email by saying she wasn't asking for forgiveness, just accountability. She included her number and said if I ever wanted to talk, really talk, she was there. No pressure. No more games. I didn't reply. But I didn't delete it either. Months passed. I moved again, closer to Newport, Oregon, when I got offered a dream role with a marine conservation group. More field work, less grant writing. I started mentoring young women in science, something I never imagined would give me so much purpose. I began building the life I'd always wanted, brick by brick. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message from a reporter. She was writing a feature story for a Pacific Northwest lifestyle magazine about toxic family dynamics and the cost of emotional labor. She'd come across a blog post I wrote under a pseudonym and wanted to interview me anonymously. I thought about it. Hard. I asked for more details. She sent me the pitch, the outline, and some other anonymous case studies she was working on. I said yes. It felt cathartic to finally say out loud the things I'd carried alone for so long. She was careful with my story, didn't dramatize it or twist the narrative. The piece went live online a month later under the title, "When the Black Sheep Walks Away, Reclaiming Life After Family Betrayal." It exploded. Emails poured in. Strangers thanking me for putting words to their own silent wounds. Messages from other black sheep across the country. It felt like joining a secret club of survivors who'd always been told they were the problem, only to find out they weren't alone. But what I didn't expect, what I couldn't have predicted, was that someone at my old high school recognized the context of the story. They posted it on a private alumni Facebook group, connecting the dots. Within a week, it spread. People began whispering about my family, not in a malicious, tabloid kind of way, but with a quiet, curious empathy. That's when things started unraveling for Miriam and Roy. They were already in Arizona by then, living in a gated retirement community that prided itself on being traditional, family-oriented. And that reputation? That image? It mattered more to them than anything. Turns out, someone from their community read the article. Someone who really read it. And they recognized them from the wedding details, the city, the circumstances. It made the rounds. They tried to claim it was fiction. My mom apparently even wrote a passive-aggressive Facebook post about delusional people seeking attention. But others weren't buying it. People who had once praised their perfect family started pulling away. Social invitations dried up. Their HOA board, which my mom had tried to run for, quietly passed her over. Their public image, the only thing they'd ever truly cared about, was crumbling. Then came the final piece. Clarice, bless her, finally snapped. I found out through an old college friend of hers who follows me on Twitter. Clarice had written a piece of her own, a long, painful open letter she published on Medium, detailing her role in the wedding debacle, her complicity, and the years of pressure to uphold a family fantasy that had suffocated her too. She laid it all bare. She named names. She even confirmed the college fund story and admitted how she let our parents guilt me for not sacrificing my future, when she knew deep down it was wrong. The article trended locally. Suddenly, it wasn't my word against theirs, it was two daughters telling the same story from different angles. That was the end of the line for Miriam and Roy in their precious community. They became a cautionary tale, the couple who turned on their own child and then tried to bury it under designer rugs and curated Instagram posts. They're still together. Still miserable, by all accounts. And me? I'm thriving. Not out of spite, not anymore. But because I finally realized that healing isn't just about moving on. It's about reclaiming the parts of you that got buried under other people's expectations. It's about building a life so rich, so full of integrity and joy, that their absence doesn't feel like a wound anymore, just empty space you can finally breathe in. As for Clarice, we're in touch now. Slowly. Carefully. She sends me updates sometimes, pictures of her new apartment, snapshots of therapy notes she finds helpful. We're not friends, not yet. Maybe never. But we're two people standing on opposite ends of the same battlefield, finally lowering our weapons. She told me once that she envies me. I told her not to. Because none of this was easy. But I chose myself. And that, more than anything, is the story I'll never be ashamed of.